Hiya folks, Carl James here from Electric Media Madness. Just a short video today, but it's one that comes hot on the heels of having just watched the first episode of Star Trek Picard. For those of you who've not watched the episode yet, please be warned that I am going to be jumping straight into spoiler territory here, so spoiler alert, please watch the episode before you watch this review. Now, I'm a massive Star Trek fan. I grew up on reruns of the original 60s Star Trek during the early 1980s. Star Trek Next Generation came along just as I turned a teenager, so it was perfectly timed for me as a sci-fi geek. I followed all the subsequent shows. Deep Space Nine remains my favourite, with TNG coming in as a close second. I really enjoyed Star Trek Voyager, and I even liked Enterprise. I own all the episodes and the films on physical media. I've watched them countless times, and I really do consider them one of my lifelong guilty pleasures. And I have to say, though, here and now, that my unconditional love of Trek became very conditional when Star Trek Discovery came along. I've seen all the episodes of Season 1 and 2, and I don't really consider it to be Star Trek in tone, theme, aesthetic, character or narrative. And I blame this fair and squarely on those members of the JJ Brigade who've been controlling the franchise since 2009. I firmly believe that they consider Star Trek to be little more than a cash grab IP subversion, one that has very little regard or respect for the franchise history, the lore, canon, and most importantly, its true fans. Now, watching Star Trek Picard posed something of a dilemma for me, because I heard that the series was coming along. I loved Star Trek Next Generation and the character of Picard, and I really wanted to see the character return, whether it be on the big screen or the small screen. However, knowing how outfits like Secret Hideout and Bad Robot regard and treat the property, I was absolutely dreading what they would be doing to the character of Picard and, by extension, the legacy of Star Trek Next Generation. Now, before I get into whether or not that dread was justified, I just want to give you a brief lowdown of the plot of this first episode. Once again, remember, spoiler alert, please watch the episode before you carry on. So, we open in the episode with Jean-Luc Picard aboard the Enterprise D, playing cards with Lieutenant Commander Data in 10 forward. Picard is startled when he sees Mars through the lounge windows erupting into explosions. We then learn that this is actually a dream. Picard wakes up on his vineyard. He's now retired from Starfleet, not at all regarding his former institution in a positive light. Picard lives with a number of Romulans and his dog, who he calls Number One, at his vineyard property. He's preparing for an interview to remember the anniversary of an event that he was actually connected to. It appears that many years prior, the Romulans were faced with the destruction of the star in their home system via an impending supernova. Picard tasked Starfleet with mounting a huge rescue mission to save the Romulan population. A fleet was constructed for the task on Mars. Subsequently, the fleet was destroyed by an attack by a group of synthetics, as they're called in the story, and it's revealed that Mars is still burning to this day as a result of the attack. Starfleet vetoed the rescue mission as a result and abandoned the Romulans to their fate. And in protest to this, Picard resigned from Starfleet. Picard takes the interviewer to task for fudging and trivialising the aforementioned events, leading Picard to wax about how Starfleet is no longer Starfleet and a dishonourable organisation. We then jump forward to a city apartment when we meet this young woman named Daj and her boyfriend. Suddenly a group of masked attackers storm the apartment and kill Daj's partner. They actually stab him in the chest. They attack Daj, who suddenly displays superhuman fighting skills, overpowers her assailants. In a strange visual cue, Daj sees the face of Picard. Daj turns up at Picard's vineyard asking for his help soon after that. He offers to put her up for the night at his vineyard, and for some unexplained reason, she flees the vineyard during the night and next seen in the city. She calls her mom, who tells her to return to Picard immediately. Daj arrives at a Starfleet museum. Picard has been investigating 2 paintings by Lieutenant Commander Data that depict Daj. Picard seems to think that Daj is Data's daughter. Outside the museum, Picard and Daj are accosted by more assailants that attacked Daj in her apartment earlier in the episode. Daj does a super fighting thingy, once again overpowers the attackers, and in the final blow, one of the attackers spits an acidic compound into Daj, which begins to burn her up. Then the attacker's weapon seems to explode, and it appears that Daj has been killed. Picard visits a scientist, specialist in artificial life forms, who seems to reveal that Daj was one of 2 synthetic clones created by Commander Data's DNA, or something to that effect. At the finale of the episode, we're taken to a Romulan-controlled Borg cube ship, where Daj's twin appears to be working as a research scientist there, and the episode ends at that point. So let's start with what I did like about the episode. Most of this concerns the use of callbacks to the glory days of Star Trek. I'm well aware that the current producers of the Star Trek franchise have used these kinds of callbacks as a cheap ploy to lure the hardcore Trek fan community back to their version of Star Trek, following the travesty that is Star Trek Discovery. And I do sort of feel a bit dirty for having lulled myself into false insecurity with these cheap tricks, but I hold my hands up and say that to a limited extent it did work for me, at least in this episode. I love seeing the flyby of the Enterprise D in the opening scene, the Star Trek Exploration and post-First Contact film uniforms, the museum pieces such as the Stargazer model Picard's pre-Enterprise D ship, the Bat'leth, the Captain Picard Day banner, after all it is for the children. I also enjoyed seeing some of the more subtle nods, such as hearing the voice of Data's original android daughter Lal during Picard's dream sequence about the painting, where she says the painting is called Daughter. That's about it really for the overly positive column. You'd think that the return of Picard would also be a factor to list here, but for me though, there is something that's sadly missing from it. I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was in the episode, but I made a few notes during the episode. In the opening scene, Data and Picard in 10 Forward, this is my initial gut feeling, was that both Patrick Stewart and Brent Spiner were almost phoning it in, for want of a better phrase. It actually felt like their hearts just weren't in the performance. I didn't feel that way for the rest of the episode, it was just that scene really. Actually, as it went on, Brent Spiner's Data didn't feel like that at all. It didn't feel like he was phoning it in at all. It was just that opening scene. But there were some concerns for me with Patrick Stewart's portrayal of Picard in the rest of the episode. During the interview sequence when Picard gives an impassioned speech about Starfleet, this is what I noted as my initial gut feeling. It feels like Stewart is just reading the script out loud rather than acting. Yes, he emotes in a Picardish kind of way, but there is something off. It almost feels like Patrick Stewart is giving a long speech rather than playing a part. I will hold any further judgments on this for further episodes of the series. I did wonder at one point if it had something to do with Patrick Stewart's age. I know this is not a very politically correct thing to say these days, but I wondered if the part was a bit too much for him. His delivery was almost laboured and tired for the duration. Unless this is how he's actually portraying the character and his acting, in which case, well done Patrick Stewart. But there is a part of me that hates seeing Picard tired and haggard. I'm looking now at a few things that really irked me about this episode. Most of these are typical fare for those who preach the ways of the JJ Brigade. First of these is Dahj. I did like the actress and initially somewhat intrigued by the character. I could see how she could easily be classified as a proverbial Mary Sue, but there was a huge saving grace of the role as a lead character in a contemporary Star Trek show. At least she isn't as thoroughly dislikable as Michael Burnham. Take that as you will. Promotion of the role by the writers was very annoying though. Within the moments of Dahj meeting Picard, both were loving each other up like they'd known each other for an entire lifetime, even though they'd just met. The writers continually used Picard to create a bunch of affirmation around Dahj, like Picard calling her brilliant for having joined the Daystrom Institute, telling her that she is dear to him, will never leave her, this is only a day after meeting her, or that she's full of meaning and courage because she comes from Data. Then there are the amazing Super Dahj scenes to contend with. Initially, she's attacked in a very brutal way, actually, but something that surprised me from the JJ Brigade version of Star Trek verse. But very quickly, she's smacking the men down, left, right and centre. Later in the episode, she even does a Super Dahj 70 feet leap up into the air and across the museum plaza and up the entrance steps. A few other bits and bobs here, typical, again, to JJ Trek. Grating, such as things like tea, Earl Grey decaf. The repeated use of terms and phrases that don't ever seem to have appeared in the vocabulary of any of the characters previously seen in the 24th century. Things like dude, codger, coot, geezer. You do have to ask the question when these terms come back into style. The answer, of course, is when JJ Trek came along and not before that. I thought the de-aging of Data was a bit naff. Considering how much money was spent on this series, you'd think that we'd get something a bit better. I know it can be done better. I think thinking about Jeff Bridges in Tron Legacy, they did a good job with that, so... On the subject of Data, I do have to highlight one of the most ludicrous components of this episode, this idea that the twins were synthetic clones of Data, or Data's DNA or something to that effect. I've always been on the illusion that in order to clone something, you need organic tissue to do it. It's made very clear throughout the entire run of Data's appearances on TV and in the films that Data was an inorganic machine. If that's the case, and therefore canonical, how can anything be cloned from him? This kind of wishy-washy twaddle is one of the key things that's truly wrong with contemporary Star Trek. Star Trek's always been science fiction, but it's always tried to extrapolate out from real-world science. But nowadays, gone are the days of advisors from the likes of NASA, JPL, Stanford Research Institute, the RAND Corporation and the like behind the scenes on Star Trek. These days, we get enchanted time crystals, magic mushroom dimensions that can recreate dead people, shooting stars in space, sonar in space, Iron Man time travel suits, and now organic synthetic clones from inorganic androids. Enough said. Overall, this episode isn't anywhere in the leagues of awfulness as Star Trek Discovery. The initial episode, I did not like it, which is something of a coup for me with contemporary Star Trek. It did have the typical JJ Trek aesthetic to it, blue filters, lens flares, odd camera angles, but they weren't quite as in your face as they are in the JJ Star Trek films and in Star Trek Discovery. I really liked the music on the show, although I felt that the theme tune was a bit unremarkable with no real catchy hooks to latch onto it. It really was great to see Picard back, really. I'm glad that he wasn't filled with rage and disappointment in the way I expected it to have been before the show aired. Picard's stuff was sizably saved by member berries, but overall it felt a bit meh. Not bad, just a bit meh. At least for now, anyway. I would like to be very optimistic about Star Trek Picard. There's a good premise somewhere in this show, and I do hope that it has a chance to shine, rather than getting overwhelmed by Alex Kurtzman-style trite dialogue, identity politics, attempts to completely destroy the established Star Trek canon. I did wonder whilst watching this episode if the latter may come to pass before the season's end, especially the way Picard was talking about Starfleet and the Federation. I had this fevered moment at one point where I pondered if the show may actually take the opportunity to completely demonise Starfleet and or the Federation and ultimately wipe it out, only then to have Michael Burnham help rebuild it far better than ever in the time period of Star Trek Discovery Season 3. I wouldn't put it past the 18, yes you heard me right there, 18 producers that worked on this show. 21 I believe on Star Trek Discovery, but there you go. So, with regards to Star Trek Picard, am I being too pessimistic? I can't help it. I've been burnt so many times by Star Trek since 2009. These people love shitting all over the past Star Trek lore. I suppose we'll have to wait and see if they're going to take another dump where Star Trek Picard is concerned. For now, I'm giving the episode a well-rounded 5 out of 10. Not outstanding, but it could be far, far worse. And with that, I just want to say thank you for watching this video. For those waiting patiently, I will have my review for Doctor Who Season 12 Episodes 3 and 4 uploaded in the next day or two. In the meantime, please like and share this video. If you enjoyed the channel, please consider subscribing. Also, don't forget to click the bell icon for notifications of new content. And I will see you in the next video.